"You paid for me, now do it." The rancher did it. And then he discovered he had a wife. Jared McAllister stood on the porch of his ranch house, staring out over the dry land. The land that had once been full of promise was now just a barren stretch of dirt. The cattle had been sick for months, and his fields had dried up. Nothing Jared did seemed to make a difference anymore. His ranch was failing, and with it, his dreams. He had been born into this life, raised to work the land and care for the animals. But now, after years of hard work, it felt like the end. The bank had already sent him warning letters, and the sheriff had visited more than once. Jared had tried everything, watering the crops more, using different seeds, and even working through the hottest parts of the day. But the truth was, no matter how hard he worked, the ranch was going under. When the letter arrived, it seemed like a dream, a last chance. The letter was from a group of wealthy investors, promising a sum of money large enough to save the ranch. There was only one catch. They needed Jared to agree to a deal involving a woman they had found, one with special skills. In return for his agreement, the investors would help him save the ranch. It sounded strange, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Jared didn't understand the details, but he didn't care. The deal was simple: sign, pay, and a woman would arrive to help with the ranch. He needed the money to survive. And so, with little more than a glance, he signed the papers. The next week, the ship arrived. It was an unfamiliar vessel, sleek and silver, landing smoothly in the dry dirt of Jared's ranch. He stood at the gate, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea who would step out of that ship, but the letter had promised a solution. The investors had spoken of her abilities in vague terms. "She will be of help to you," was all they had said. Jared had no idea what that meant, but if it meant saving his ranch, he was willing to try anything. The ramp lowered, and a woman stepped out. She was tall, with striking features and skin that almost seemed to glow faintly in the sunlight. Her hair was long and dark, tied back in a simple braid. She didn't look like any woman Jared had ever seen. Her eyes, sharp and clear, took in her surroundings as though she was scanning for something. She didn't seem scared, just distant. Jared felt a lump in his throat. He had expected someone plain, someone he could handle, but this woman was different. She carried herself with a kind of grace and confidence that was almost intimidating. "Are you Leora?" he asked, his voice uncertain. She nodded without speaking, her gaze never leaving his. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Finally, Jared cleared his throat and gestured toward the house. "Well, come on in," he said, trying to sound casual, though his nerves were getting the best of him. Leora followed him into the house, and they sat at the kitchen table. Jared tried to make small talk, asking about where she was from, but she gave little away. Her answers were brief, to the point, and there was an air of quiet authority about her that left Jared uncomfortable. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of woman he had just brought into his life. She didn't seem to mind the silence, and after a moment she spoke. "You paid for me," she said, her voice cool and direct, her eyes locked onto his. Jared blinked in confusion. "I paid for you?" he repeated, his mind racing. He didn't remember any mention of buying her. He had thought she was just part of the deal. The investors had called it an arrangement, but had they meant something else? Leora didn't explain further. She stood up and walked out the door without another word. Jared watched her, still trying to make sense of the situation. But he didn't have time to dwell on it. There was work to be done, and he had already paid for help, so help was what he needed. The next few days were a blur of strange, unexpected occurrences. Leora moved across the land with a quiet precision. She didn't ask questions or waste time. The ranch that had been so dry and barren started to show signs of life. The cattle were healthier. The crops seemed to grow taller, stronger, almost overnight. It was like someone had flipped a switch, and Jared couldn't understand how or why. One evening, as the sun began to set, Jared found Leora standing in the middle of the field, her eyes closed, her arms outstretched as though she was feeling the land itself. He stood in the distance watching her, unsure of what to think. She was different from anyone he had ever met. There was something otherworldly about her. As Jared approached, she turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "I've been paid for," she said softly, her gaze piercing. "Now I will work." Jared wasn't sure what to say. He had expected a worker, someone to help him till the land and care for the animals, but this was something more. The way she spoke, the way she moved, there was power in her. He didn't know if it was her training or something else, but he wasn't sure he was prepared for it. "You're not just a worker, are you?" he finally asked, his voice low. "There's something more to you." Leora looked at him, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "You don't understand yet," she replied, "but you will." Jared felt a chill run down his spine, but he couldn't look away. He didn't know what it was, but something about her made him feel like he was standing on the edge of something much bigger than a simple ranch deal. The next day, Leora continued to work, her focus unbroken, but Jared began to notice something strange. As she worked, the plants in the field grew with unnatural speed. He saw it with his own eyes. Tall green stalks sprouting where nothing had grown before, flowers blooming in a matter of hours. The air around her seemed to hum with energy, and the land itself responded. Jared's confusion deepened. He had paid for help, but this was something entirely different. She wasn't just helping the ranch, she was changing it. Changing everything. As the day drew to a close, Jared found himself staring at her, unable to look away. He had signed a contract for help, but what he was getting was far beyond his expectations. Leora was more than just a hired hand. She was something else, something powerful, something he couldn't quite grasp. He had no idea what he had gotten himself into. The days blurred into one another for Jared McAllister. The ranch that had once been a symbol of his failure was now thriving. Leora, the woman he had paid for, continued to work with a quiet efficiency that both puzzled and amazed him. The fields were growing lush, and the cattle were healthier than they had been in years, but Jared couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was happening. There was an undeniable change in the land, a shift in the air around the ranch, and it all seemed to center around Leora. The way she moved, so graceful, so purposeful, had started to make Jared question what exactly he had gotten himself into. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, Jared sat on the porch, watching Leora work. She stood in the middle of the field again, her arms raised as though she was calling the wind. Jared had seen her do this many times. But tonight, there was something different about it. The air around her shimmered, as if the earth itself was responding to her presence. His curiosity finally got the best of him, and he stood up, making his way toward her. As he approached, Leora's eyes opened, and for the first time she looked at him as if she had been waiting for him. "Leora," Jared began, his voice uncertain. "What is this? What are you doing to the land?" Leora's expression remained unreadable, but she lowered her arms slowly, her gaze never leaving his. "I'm connecting with it," she said, her voice calm but filled with an underlying power. "The land listens. It speaks to me." Jared felt a shiver run down his spine. He had heard whispers among the townspeople about strange happenings on the ranch. People were talking about how the land was changing, how the crops were thriving beyond reason, how the animals were healthier than any rancher could hope for. But no one understood why or how. You can talk to the land?" Jared asked, still trying to process her words. Leora's eyes softened, and for a brief moment she looked almost human, vulnerable. "But I can understand it, feel it, the plants, the soil, the animals. They all have a rhythm, a pulse. I can hear it." Jared was silent for a moment, trying to comprehend what she was saying. "I don't understand. How is this possible?" Leora turned and started walking back toward the house, her footsteps light but steady. Jared followed, still not fully grasping the enormity of what was happening. "It's in my blood," she said, as if that explained everything. "I was born to do this. To heal." "Heal?" Jared repeated, his mind racing. "You mean the land?" Leora glanced at him over her shoulder. The land, the people, the animals, everything. Jared stopped in his tracks. The word heal lingered in the air between them. He had never considered that the woman he had brought here might have abilities that went far beyond what he could understand. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. The ranch was thriving, after all. It wasn't just the soil, it was the way everything was coming to life, as if something was pushing it all to grow. Leora led him to the porch where they sat down. The evening was calm, the sounds of nature surrounding them. For a while, neither of them spoke. Jared stared out at the fields, wondering what this all meant for him, for his ranch, and for the future. He had been so focused on keeping the ranch afloat, on surviving, that he hadn't stopped to consider the bigger picture. Finally, Leora broke the silence. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "You think I'm just here to help at the ranch, but that's not why I'm here." Jared turned to face her, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What do you mean?" "Isn't that the deal? I paid for you to help me." Leora's gaze softened, but there was a trace of sadness in her eyes. "It's more than that. You didn't just pay for me to work. You paid for me to help you, To help you see what you're truly capable of. Jared didn't know how to respond. Was she talking about the ranch? Or was there something else she meant? I don't know what you're saying, he admitted. Leora sighed and looked at the ground. I was sent here for a reason. You don't know this, but there are people out there, people who want control of this land. Control of you. I'm here to make sure you don't fall into their hands. Jared felt his stomach tighten. He had heard rumors of wealthy investors who controlled large swaths of land across the galaxy. People who used their power to manipulate others, to take what they wanted without question. But he had never thought they would come after him, after his small ranch. Who? He asked, his voice low. Who are these people? Leora's expression darkened. The people who arranged this deal, those investors, they're just the tip of the iceberg. The real danger is much bigger. They're using people like me, like you, to get what they want. And they'll stop at nothing. Jared felt a cold wave of realization hit him. This was no simple business deal. There was something far more dangerous at play. The woman he had paid for, the one who had changed everything on his ranch, was part of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. But why me? He asked, his voice trembling. Why did they pick me? Leora's gaze softened and she leaned forward, her voice almost a whisper. Because you're important. You're more important than you realize. Jared's mind was spinning, trying to make sense of it all. The ranch, the strange woman, the mysterious investors, none of it added up. He had thought this was just about saving his land. But now, it felt like he had stumbled into something that was far beyond his control. You're not just here to help me fix this ranch, he said slowly. You're here to protect me. Leora nodded. Yes, and to teach you. Because you're the key to stopping them. Jared felt a chill run through him as the weight of her words sank in. He had never imagined that his simple ranching life would become a battleground, but here he was, in the middle of something far bigger than he had ever thought possible. For the first time, Jared realized that the ranch wasn't just his fight. It was a fight for something much more important, and it was a fight that he couldn't run from, no matter how hard he tried. The days following their conversation were filled with a sense of urgency. Jared and Leora worked together, preparing for what was coming. The warning Leora had given him echoed in Jared's mind constantly. The investors were coming for the land, and they wouldn't stop until they had control. Jared had always thought of his ranch as just a piece of land, something he worked and cared for. But now, it was more than that. It was a symbol, a battleground. And Leora, the woman who had once seemed like nothing more than a hired hand, was at the center of it all. She was more than just his protector. She was his ally, and together they would defend not just the ranch, but the land itself. The first step was to prepare. Jared and Leora spent their days reinforcing the ranch, securing the perimeter, and making sure everything was in place. The ranch had always been Jared's pride and joy, but now it felt like something larger was at stake. The land had changed, and Jared was beginning to understand why. It wasn't just about crops and cattle anymore. The ranch had become a living thing, something with its own rhythm and pulse, and it needed to be protected. Leora had been teaching him, guiding him, showing him how to connect with the land on a deeper level. It wasn't just about physical labor anymore. Jared had started to feel the rhythm of the earth beneath his feet, to sense the subtle changes in the soil, to understand the needs of the plants and animals around him. He could feel it now. The land was alive, and it was fighting back. Jared had learned that the investors who had arranged the deal were only the beginning. They were part of a much larger network of powerful individuals who wanted control over the land, the resources, and everything in between. But they had underestimated Jared. They had underestimated the ranch, and they had certainly underestimated Leora. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Leora turned to Jared with a serious expression. "They're coming," she said quietly. "The investors. They'll arrive in the morning." Jared stood up, his heart racing. "What do we do now?" Leora stood as well, her eyes locked on his. "We fight. We protect the land." Jared nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. He had never been a man of violence. He had always preferred to solve problems with hard work, with patience. But now he knew that wasn't enough. This fight wasn't just about his ranch anymore. It was about something much bigger. It was about the future of Durana, and he couldn't let these people take it. The next morning, as the sun rose, Jared and Leora stood at the edge of the ranch waiting. In the distance, they could see the convoy approaching, several sleek black vehicles making their way across the plain. The investors had come, but they weren't just here for a simple transaction. Jared could feel it in the air. Their presence was oppressive, like a storm waiting to break. Leora stood beside him, her expression calm, but Jared could see the tension in her shoulders. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly. Jared took a deep breath. "I don't know, but I have to be." As the convoy drew closer, Leora stepped forward, her movements smooth and confident. Jared followed, though his heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't backing down. The vehicles stopped, and the doors opened. A group of men stepped out, businessmen in expensive suits, their faces cold and calculating. The leader of the group, a tall man with dark hair and piercing eyes, walked toward them. Jared didn't recognize him, but the look in his eyes told Jared everything he needed to know. This was the man in charge. "I'm surprised you're still here," the man said, his voice low and condescending. "We thought you'd have sold by now." Jared stood his ground, meeting the man's gaze. "I'm not selling." "Not now. Not ever." The man's smile was cold, predatory. "You don't have a choice. This land belongs to us, whether you want to admit it or not." Leora stepped forward, standing beside Jared. "This land is not yours to take," she said, her voice strong. "It belongs to the people of Durana, and we will fight to protect it." The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment there was silence. Jared could feel the tension in the air, the calm before the storm. He had no idea what would happen next, but he knew they had to stand firm. If they didn't, everything they had fought for would be lost. The man turned to his associates who were standing behind him waiting for orders. Jared could see the hesitation in their eyes, and for a moment he wondered if they had second thoughts. But then the man spoke again, his voice filled with venom. "You really think you can stand against us?" he sneered. "You're nothing more than a fool who's too stubborn to realize when he's beaten." Jared's heart pounded, but he didn't back down. "I'm not a fool," he said, his voice steady. "And I'm not afraid of you." Leora's eyes burned with intensity, her gaze fixed on the leader. "You have no idea what you're up against." For a long moment there was silence. The two sides stared at each other, the weight of the confrontation hanging in the air. Finally, the man gave a short, harsh laugh. "This is your last warning," he said, turning on his heel. "You'll regret this." As the investors turned to leave, Jared stood tall, his heart still racing, but his resolve stronger than ever. They had come to take the land, but they hadn't counted on Leora, or on Jared's unwavering determination to protect it. The convoy drove off, and Jared let out a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. They had won this round, but Jared knew this wasn't over. The battle had just begun. As the sun set behind them, Jared and Leora stood side by side, looking out over the ranch. The land was quiet now, but Jared could feel the pulse beneath his feet. It was alive, and with Leora by his side, he knew they would fight to protect it, no matter the cost. The future of Durana was in their hands, and Jared McAllister was ready to stand tall, ready to protect the land that had given him everything. It was only the beginning.